Hey guys, welcome to Spark of the Youth podcast, episode 4, I believe. That went fast. So, if you guys haven't followed me on Instagram, please do. It's Spark Youth Podcast, and on Facebook, it's Spark of the Youth Podcast. Like that page and follow it. So today we're going to talk about removing / detaching / escaping a toxic relationship. And today I have my guest Stefani here, and she's going to talk a little on her situation and what she went through and some things going on and how she's still recovering, and hopefully shed a little light for you guys who are maybe in the same situation or going through something similar to it. And just keep in mind that this is fresh to her, and this is still just a couple months from happening, so just be patient when you're listening, and as she goes through things, if you need a break, take that break, because it is a lot.
Hi guys, this is Steph, here to talk about a situation that I was going through for a couple of years. This was a bit of a toxic relationship I found myself in, and so in the beginning, my relationship, of course, felt normal. We were friends, and as time progressed, I started to realize that the person I was with may not have been what I expected. Coming to notice that he would keep me from doing things that I normally enjoyed, such as seeing friends and family, or even enjoying my day out rather than being stuck inside. There are times in our arguments that I eventually would tell him I would leave. And at that point, I found myself in a much worse situation where I was being physically pushed around and at times soon enough thrown from across the room. I was stuck between feeling afraid and still loving the guy. He was my best friend, and this repeated a few more times before I found myself gaining the courage to leave. And that day came where we were having another argument, and he was yelling at me as usual, but he took a step towards me, and all the fear returned, but with it I somehow used it to hit him right in the jaw. And I wish I didn't, because his reaction was, well, he punched me right back, and I kept thinking to myself, I deserve this. And I hated myself because, to me, I caused him to become that. And I kept thinking to myself, if I hadn't, he never would have hit me. But he cried at what he done, and I felt like I was the guilty one. I ended up leaving that week. Time passed, and I couldn't help but miss the friend I left behind, despite all the troubles I faced when things were bad. It was hard to let go of remembering the good times and, those dangers of being lonely. So, with that being said, I found myself back together with him after everybody told me not to and to stay away. But that was short-lived. There wasn't any physical abuse this time, but I slowly started to see that he was falling back into keeping me away from seeing the people I cared about again. And I ended up removing myself once again, this time for good. before he started to grow into anything worse.
All right. Wow. So thank you for sharing that with us. Thanks for taking the time to do that, and I know the strength and courage it takes to speak on it. So first question I want to ask is, when you first got in the relationship, what were some habits you noticed that kind of gave you some red flags?
Well, I kind of mentioned it a little bit, but there would be days where I wanted to go spend time with my friends or go see my family, and he would try to pull up some excuses like, oh, we live far and we don't have gas money, when technically I did. But he would keep me from seeing people that I cared about, and he would tell me he wants to spend time, with me, and like basically keep me all to himself. But after a while, it was just, I see you every day, and we did spend a lot of time with each other, but I noticed he was really controlling in that sense, and it did make me feel weird because I was not used to that. And I figured I should still be able to see at least my family.
When you started noticing these things, did it just feel like, oh, okay, this is regular, this is probably just how he is in a relationship?
In the very beginning, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, in the very beginning. But like gradually it just started happening more and more often. And like, if I would mention that I wanted to go, like, I would notice that he would catch an attitude, or little arguments would start to pop up in a way to keep me from leaving. He would try to make me feel guilty because certain things weren't being done that if I never would have brought up me leaving, it wouldn't have been an issue.
And at which point the first time around did you realize, like, that's it? Like, other than the situation you said, like the whole scenario, what kind of clicked in your head feeling wise, like emotionally, that you were like, yeah, this is the last straw for me?
Well, it was hard, to be honest, because aside from all the negative things I mentioned, being like thrown around literally, and like the situation I mentioned, he was what I thought was my best friend. I spent so much time around him, and he was all I spent my time around, and I cared about him a lot. So there wasn't much else that I was upset about except for that. But I knew that it was dangerous, because those physical situations, the only thing they could do was escalate, and it did eventually, which was why I removed myself that first time.
And then after that, I know you were in a relationship after that. How was the time in between just being with yourself and then realizing the whole situation, calming down, and then preparing yourself for that next relationship? How did that go about, like, you inside of you, mentally and emotionally and even physically? How did you get prepared for that next stage?
Well, I embraced my freedom, started to embrace me again and do all the things that I loved and try to find myself, who I used to be before I left to be with him the first time. And I felt like I was there. I was happy. I was in control of myself, and I feel like that's where I went wrong. Like, I immediately, once I was happy, I felt like everything was fine and nothing bad could happen to me again. And eventually, somebody, did, catch my eye at one point, and I felt like I can do this again. Like, I wasn't looking for anyone. And, I ended up seeing somebody, though. And while I was seeing this person, I kind of started to think back on this person that I had just previously been in the relationship with, that I had ran away from. And I kept comparing, and it kind of made me miss him more. I missed the best friend that I left. And I found myself back in contact with him. And I ended up leaving this person that I just met to go back with this person that was toxic to me.
And then from there, once you got back with him, how was that whole process, and just feeling, I guess, how did you feel, knowing that that was gonna happen, and then did you feel like things were gonna be different this time, and what kind of happened the second time around, and in the beginning, and then how did it lead up to you leaving again?
It was really emotional, because I missed him so much, remembering obviously all the good times and trying to weigh it against, the bad things that happened. And he was in my ear telling me, he would fix everything, and he would change, and he would be better, and he wouldn't do all those things that he did that hurt me in the past. And he just kept promising and promising, and bringing up the fact that I was his best friend. And it triggered my emotions even more to lean towards getting back into a relationship with him. Now, when that happened, everything was, it felt great, because it seemed as though he was following those promises, and he was good. But then after a couple months, weeks passed, start to notice the complacency and him falling back into the old habits of being controlling and keeping me from doing those things that I loved, that in the past led to bigger, scarier situations. So from there, I kind of, after realizing what was happening, I had to remove myself again. And I did.
And like I said, you don't have to answer if you don't want to, but I know you guys ended up getting engaged at one point.
Yeah.
So how was that feeling for you? Did you feel like yeah, I can do this? Or was it more like taking a chance?
Well, that happened shortly after we got back into a relationship again. At that point, he hadn't fallen back into the old habits, and I was seeing this really pleasant side of the relationship, and I was so excited because I felt like this is happening. I'm gonna have like this happy ending or something, and everything's as it should be. And I don't know, I was happy at the time. But again, that is, of course, until like I noticed things falling back into their old habits.
And then what made you finally say, I'm really done this time?
It was a build-up. I actually, on New Year's Eve, every New Year's Eve, I spent it with my family. Every single one except for the one that just passed. And I sat home that night and I cried because he made me feel guilty about leaving him to go. And the only reason why he didn't go is because he didn't feel comfortable around my family. So that was a major influence.
Okay. And I think the other question I wanted to ask was, since then, since you've separated from him, and you're going about your days now, and it's been months later, how are you dealing with yourself emotionally, and what are you doing to kind of remind yourself to keep going?
I'm just taking it day by day and trying to remember, that what happened is a lesson. I'm trying to push through and try not to fall back into those, little bits of missing him, because if, ultimately I feel like I'm always going to miss, the good in everyone and everyone that I involve myself with. But I know now that this is a lesson that I was meant to learn from the hard way twice. So I'm just, again, using this time to be free and spend it knowing other good that's out there, and just living.
I know we mentioned some therapy, so
yes.
You actually took that step forward.
I am. So I've actually been told for a while now that I should, by a couple people that care about me, and I always kind of brush it off because, hey, I'm fine, but I've decided maybe I'm not. All these situations that I've held in for so long, I just decided I should give it a try. And so I actually had my first session seeing a therapist on Monday, and I'll be continuing with that until we could hopefully get me all cleared up.
And you don't have to tell us about the first session, but how did it feel for you to have that first session? And when you left that first session, how did you feel after?
I was so full of anxiety, to be honest, because you're, like I am now, technically exposing yourself to somebody, and all the things that, I've kept held inside for so long. It's also relieving though, because once it's said aloud, it's like I just feel like I've released so much pressure from holding it in. So I feel good. I feel much better after getting it off my chest. And it's definitely something I do recommend to anyone who might be thinking about, being seen or not knowing if it's going to work. Because technically I didn't know whether or not it would. And I figured I'd just give it a shot. But after the first session, I do feel like it's impacted me in a good way.
All right, and lastly, is there anything you want to say to anyone who's currently in the situation and to anyone who is recovering from this kind of situation?
Well, to anyone who's in this situation, if you're trying to weigh out the good and the bad, if you're going through any situation where somebody is physically hurting you or doing something physically to you that emotionally you feel hurts, and you have to weigh out your options, you probably shouldn't even stay in that situation, because ultimately things, they gradually get worse, or at least they could ultimately get worse, and you don't want to be hurt by somebody that you care about or you think cares about you. And for those who are recovering, just know that you're not alone, and it's okay to gather and recollect yourself after you've had any kind of traumatic situation or a situation that may have hurt you in the slightest bit. Whatever happens or whatever happened, you can use it to grow, to learn from, and to obviously make sure that you avoid anything like that happening to you in the future.
Is there anything else you want to leave everybody with before we close out?
No matter what tough situation you might be in right now, or you may have been in, it's not going to define who you are. It can only help you become the better version of what you want to be, or what you need to be, or what you feel like you want to be.
All right, well, thank you again, Steph, for so much advice and for sharing your story with us and for being here and being so raw with us and just allowing everyone to see and hear your vulnerability. I guess we're gonna close it out today. So if you haven't followed me on Instagram, it's Spark Youth Podcast, and on Facebook it's Spark of the Youth Podcast. And I will see you guys next week. Tell me what you guys want to hear. I usually put a vote up on Instagram, so check that out and vote for what you want. And I'll talk to you guys next week. Bye-bye.